Great that you're here for the Debt Jubilee webinar. I'm Vera Lubbersen. I will be moderating this discussion. I've been a part of this project right from the beginning, and I also helped writing the position paper. First, I have some practical information. Unfortunately, you cannot be here physically, but fortunately, we do have the technology so that you can be here now digitally. You can even chat with each other via the chat button. And you can also, most importantly, ask questions. These questions will be sorted, and Rens van Tilburg will be asking the most interesting questions to our beautiful discussants. So please also state to whom you want to ask this question. Then about the content of the discussion. I've been working on this project for more than a year now. And a lot has changed actually from the beginning. And now that we are in the coronavirus, the debt problem is even more urgent and more urgent to discuss also. So this webinar is part of the Finance and the Common Good program, which is all about relational finance. And therefore, we also try to look at this problem, this debt problem, from a new perspective, from a relational finance perspective. So debt is more than a transaction alone. It is a relationship between the debtor and the creditor. And therefore, we would also argue that it is a shared responsibility between the debtor and the creditor. So the discussion will be structured as follows. We have decided to split the discussion into 3 parts. The first part will be about the debt problem. The second part will be about the new way we look at this problem. And then the third part will be about the potential solutions to this problem. Each part, Arjo Klamer will give a short explanation based on our position paper. And then the discussion will start. Please do not forget to ask your questions that we can use during the discussion. So now I would like to give the floor to Rens, who will introduce our panel.
Yes, Vera, thank you very much. Because we're going to talk about the debt jubilee, we need many different disciplines, and fortunately we have found 4, well, we can say homo universalis, because they together combine economy with theology, history, philosophy, but also a lot of practical knowledge of today's economy and society. So to start with, from Germany, we have Professor Niels Goldschmidt from Siegen University, who studied both economics and theology, and who in Germany is a leading thinker on the social market economy with his ideas on the contextual economy, which goes beyond seeing economy as a question of supply and demand, but looking especially at institutions and norms also. Then from Italy, we are joined by Professor Luigino Bruni of LUMSA University in Rome, who studies the historical and physical foundations of economic thought and is also involved in the initiative of Pope Francis to inspire young economists and entrepreneurs with the economy of Francesco. And thirdly, we have another economist, a monetary economist, Maurice Oostendorp, who has a long career in banking, spending the last 6 years as the CEO of the Volksbank, which translates as the People's Bank of the Netherlands, where he introduced the concept of shared value and was able to translate that in a lot of very interesting, innovative practices. But as a start, as Vera already said, we have Professor Arjo Klamer, who is also a member of the Sustainable Finance Lab, professor of cultural economics at the Erasmus University, wrote a lot of books, the most recent one, Doing the Right Thing, in which he introduces a value-based approach to the economy. I think that's very much what he will be doing today on the specific topic of the debt problem. Arjo has also been quite politically active, serving as an alderman in his hometown. And I believe that also brought him a lot of inspiration for what we're going to talk about today. So Arjo, may I ask you to make an introduction on the debt problem?
Yeah. Great to have the opportunity to be able to present the report, a shared responsibility, a present-day application of the Jubilee. That is the result of a concerted effort of economists, theologians, philosophers, historians, and also legal scholars. Bringing it all together, trying to present another perspective on debts in general and individual debts in particular. As Vera already pointed out, the debt mountain is an urgent problem. Only more urgent because of the current crisis that we are experiencing. It was already a really challenging problem with the financial crisis starting in 2008. We economists were tremendously worried about the debt then, because debts cause financial instability, hampers growth, and also increases inequality. And scaring as it is, the debt mountain is only growing, by all accounts, by at least 80% since the financial crisis. So the problem is only more serious. It shows up in the debts that countries accumulate. Of course, we went through a long episode with Greece. Now, Italy is problematic, but that is true for countries throughout the world. Today, I think we want to focus especially on individual debts. Because one thing that sort of motivates us is that individual debts become increasingly problematic. Let's be clear, we are economists, so we think that debts are part of the modern day economy. Inevitable and necessary and also useful to finance entrepreneurial activity to get the economy growing. So that's not a problem. The problem becomes when debts become problematic, are unproductive, don't contribute to economic activity. And what we observe is that increasingly, in the Netherlands, 20% of Dutch households get into problem because of debt. And that is all showing up in the numbers, but as Ren said, I had my experience as an alderman, and I met these people all the time. And I noticed what it means for people to be in debt. It gets them depressed, it gets them passive, short-sighted, it gets them anxious, it gets them paralyzed, it gets them aggressive and even addicted and also inclined to criminal activity. Combined with all the costs that we have with debt collecting agencies, all kinds of professionals dealing with it, it is a huge cost for society, all these debts together. It's madness. And what I think we are trying to do together with all kinds of perspectives is see whether we can change the perspective to address this debt problem once and for all, to find a solution for it that enables us to have people, what we would say, a dignified life. And I think what we are going to, but that's what I want to continue to, is that it requires also a sort of moral re-evaluation of the way we look at debt. But that's the next part of the program. Yeah.
Okay. Maurice Oostendorp, you're the CEO of the Volksbank, which is a bank with very much a mission linked to relational finance and taking this responsibility also from a bank. So how do you look at this problem?
Good morning. Well, first of all, I think, like the paper is saying, debtors have the greatest guilt. That's correct. But in a modern society based on personal freedom, debtors also have the greatest responsibility, according to my view. They have a choice to adapt themselves or not. However, I fully agree with Ayo that increasing debts, whether it's about states, companies or private individuals, are becoming an increasing problem. And having stated my first statement, I do agree, I fully agree with the fact that a debt is a shared responsibility. The debt indeed signifies a relationship between the two parties involved. And hence, if there is a problem, both parties need to contribute to the solution. Money is a difficult product in the concept of banking. Banks often see money as a product on the basis of which you try to increase your profit. We have a serious question with that approach. So it goes further than just the relationship between the bank and its clients. We believe that a shared value approach means that we have to optimize the value of each individual stakeholder, but keeping in mind the total value that it creates. And based on that relational banking concept, again, we fully agree with the shared responsibility. It comes with more practical things than that, but I will come back to that later.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so I think we can agree that there is indeed a problem, and that we can also look at it from a new perspective, in which we can see this as a relationship, and in this relationship, we try to look at a solution to help this person handle his debt. So then I would like to move on to the second part. What is this new way of looking at the debt problem in your perspective, Arjo?
Yeah, Oostendorp already took already anticipated what we are going to discuss now, and that's indeed to sort of change the perspective. See, in Dutch, debt and guilt are the same, have the same word, schuld. In English, you can separate the two. So in Dutch, we speak about schuldenaren. People who have a debt also, and that's implied in the concept, also have guilt. So in the current moral setting, and Oostendorp already sort of pointed that out, we think that the debtor, the schuldenaar, has the major responsibility and also should bear the burden if the debt becomes problematic. And how our whole system is built on that. We economists also feed that with notions like moral hazard. That means that we always sort of are suspicious of people taking advantage, seeking opportunity. And so the built-in perspective is that we suspect debtors, and therefore we also think that debtors should pay and be penalized if they don't live up to their commitment. And so we have in the Netherlands a whole system of a debt relief program that is dehumanizing. I cannot think of it any other way. I was thinking of this South African woman who came to me. She had a debt of about, at that moment, of 160,000 euros. She got the debt because her ex was a gambler. And when they got divorced, it turned out she had a debt of about 90,000 euros. And that accumulated very quickly with all kinds of debt collection agencies adding their fees. And it was in that time already 160,000 euros. And I had to offer her, that's what I have offered, listen, you can go 3 years and then you get 60 euros a week to spend. And then you are relieved from your debt. And she looked at me and said, what in the hell do you think I am? That I have to go through such a humiliating program. And I thought at first, is she crazy? And then later I thought, no, is she right? What do we do to people? You also had this boyfriend or friend who went to study for a pilot and ended up with 100,000 euros debt. And you told me how his life is basically wasted. He cannot find a girlfriend. He is depressed. He had a hard time to get his life in order because this debt is really pulling him down. Now, these are just two cases. There are numerous cases like that. So, and that's why I'm very glad that we have two also economists who are also theologians. So curious how they look at it, because if we go and look up the Bible and the Quran and all those texts, we get a totally different perspective. Then it is people who are morally suspicious, who exact interest, usury, on debtors, then it is clear that we are in a relation to each other. We are supposed to help each other in the sense of a partnership. Oostendorp already pointed that out. And certainly when people are vulnerable and in trouble, then, and that's what, of course, we the Christian at least, pray every time, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. That's sort of ingrained in the Christian attitude. And now I know that, and I think that Maurice already pointed out, that in our current system, talking about forgiving, that is like almost a curse word, right? How could you think about forgiving people who are indebted? The belief is that then carnage will follow, then people will take advantage, and all the bad things will come out. Whereas I think the Bible and the Quran teach us more the importance of relations, that it is not just transactions, but we also are related to each other. And here comes, I think, what we come in our report, consulting people like Graeber, known for his 5,000 years of debt, the first 5,000 years. He makes it very clear. There's some other people from a Dutch institution, Movisi, who made that clear, that we should debt also see as a relational thing, as something that comes about in a relationship. That those who give a debt also have the responsibility of care. That I think Ossendorp already pointed that out. But, and that's very important, that of course, and there we agree that the debtor also has a responsibility. And we think that the key term is responsibility, that both parties should take their responsibility. But we also think that if the debt becomes problematic, then it becomes a shared responsibility. And you have to find a solution. We are going to provide a solution that we think can also in an institutional sense realize that shared responsibility in a sensible way, because it is not that the creditor should bear the brunt of all the cost of a bad debt. That should also be borne by the person who took out the debt. But in certain cases, like that is going on right now with the coronavirus, when we all agree that debts become problematic, not because the debtor didn't live up to his responsibility, but there are unforeseen circumstances and disaster, which brings all kinds of debts and problems, that the community as a whole has responsibility. So then it is not right that then the creditor should incur all the cost, or the debtor, but that it should be also a communal responsibility. So the key term that we figured in this rethinking what we call then the relational finance is responsibility, but it should be part of this whole relationship, like the Bible and also the Quran, but especially the Bible points out, is that there is a moment that we should forgive, that we should give people a chance to start all anew and to be having a chance to participate in a dignified way fully in society. Because in the current system, as a lawyer pointed out, when you murder your wife, you get 4 years. When you don't pay the milkman, you get a lifelong sentence. That is strange. That's not right. That is not moral. So we argue in our report for a re-evaluation with, as a key element, a redefinition of the responsibilities of the creditors and the debtors. I'm very curious how our theologian economists respond to that.
Yeah, Professor Bruni, you live very close to the Vatican, and I believe you also are very much theologian as well. Arjo also talked about the responsibility of between debtors and creditors. So how do you look at that?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to Arjo. We can continue our discussions on economics and theology we started a couple of years ago. Thank you. I just would like to contribute to this interesting debate, starting from the rationale of the Jubilee in the Bible. Because the Jubilee in the Bible is very much related to the concept of Shabbat. Then, as you know, Shabbat is something that is peculiar to the Bible, the Jewish Bible, because there is the idea that there is something more important than economic relationship. That we are brothers and sisters. There is a link more profound than the cash nexus. And then we cannot be slaves forever, because, as you know, in the ancient cultures, the destiny of people that was not able to repay debt was to become slave of the creditor. And then you cannot be slave forever. That is the reason also Arjo was mentioning. And then the logic of Shabbat is the Jubilee is the universal fraternity. And For that reason, it's interesting to look at Psalm 37 in the Bible. That is interesting in verse 21, when we read, "The wicked men borrow and do not repay." This is interesting. There is not a guilt in lending money with interest, as we know in the Quran, in the Bible, and in other, not many, but other religions. But it's also wrong to borrow money and do not repay. This is condemned in the Bible. Maybe it's not very much emphasized, because it's more emphasized the supply side of the relationship than the demand side. But also there is the wicked borrow and do not repay. And then why this is interesting issue? I also wrote a paper that has been translated by a Dutch Protestant newspaper in the middle of the COVID crisis about this relationship between debt and guilt. But guilty. But the idea is that debt is a relationship, and this relationship can be often a relationship of power. A relationship of power. And then in the Bible, the rationale of the condemnation of debt with interest is the condemnation of rent seeking. Because there is someone with a power of money, because that has a power, and uses this power for getting money, profit without labor, without a reason for that. Then is a condemnation of rent seeking. If you look from an economics point of view, what was going on in the Bible about the debt. But today, going directly to the issue of public debt, because today what is at stake, in particular in this moment of COVID crisis in Europe, is the public debt, also the recovery fund and so on. Because the public debt is something very special. First, because historically in Italy in particular, the first debt with legitimate interest rate was applied to public debt, not to private. In particular in Florence in the 14th century, was okay, it's legitimate to pay interest rate for the debt of Florence city state. Then the public debt has been always seen from a different perspective, because the public debt is not exactly the debt of the merchant, the debt of the entrepreneur. But when you increase, I'm Italian, when you increase public debt, you are moving the cost of something towards the future. This is the problem. And then to the children, to the young people. And then there is a huge ethical issue. I'm publicly against the idea to increase public debt in Italy for the COVID, because as long as we continue to pay our cost of today using the debt, we are moving this cost to our children. And it is ethically very, very, very dangerous. And then we cannot forget this issue, because debt is a relationship along the time, and involves the relationship between past, present, and future. And then the responsibility is dynamic, is diachronic, and not just synchronic of what is going on today.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Bruni. So if I understand you right, it is both an ethical issue because you move this responsibility over time, and it's also a kind of power relationship between the creditor and the debtor. So Professor Goldsmith, this is kind of a very much an issue that involves moral judgment from this perspective. But in your video, you stated, your introductory video to this webinar, you stated that economists should not engage in moral, or predominantly engage in moral judgment. So how do you look at this when we say it is a power relationship, or it is there is an ethical issue because we give the debt to our younger generations? How do you look at this?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation and the possibility to be part of this morning session. And I really like the report. I think it's a very important issue, and I'm happy that you made the effort to put something like this report together. Yeah, first of all, so my point is not that I would say that as an economist, you can't talk about ethical issues. My point is you shouldn't mix it up. So we have ethical issues and you have to discuss them philosophically, and you have economic issues and you have to be clear on both sides. But of course, in the end, you have to bring them together, and the motor is easy. The engine for our efforts, even as economists, is of course an ethical one, and that it's about a good life. So the economy should serve the people and not the other way around. It's always about a good life, and an economist is someone who is an expert to understand economic relationships and has to understand what's going on in the economy. And therefore, so that's my point, not to mix both sides up. And otherwise, I'm happy about the report of Arjo and the others because that they make clear, even though as an economist you have to look on the economic issues, especially, it is clear that even as an economist you're not able to understand economic processes without looking to the context. So as some of you might know, one of my research issues is contextual economics, and I'm really convinced that if you want to understand economic issues, we have not only to isolate things, so isolate economics, even though it's still the predominant way of doing economics at universities, but you have to understand the context. So the economist Willem Röpke, one of the founding fathers of the social market economy, always said we have to look beyond supply and demand, and I'm really convinced to that. So coming back more to the debt issue, yeah, I think Luigi Bruni has a very important point. It's about power relation, and even as a plain economist, you would always say if you have power within an economic relation, you get an imbalance, and that's always a problem. And you have to try to bring out these power relationship, because economic exchange only works if you can meet on the same level, and power always needs you have a hierarchical level. But to bring in two points where I'm not quite sure if how we should deal with that. So the first point is, and I'm eager to know how Arjo would answer to that, or the others would answer it. How do these ideas of a debt jubilee or something like that really fit in a market economy? So a market economy, it's about private property, it's about free contracts, and yeah, we all know, and from economic history, that private property, free contracts was one of the things that makes Deirdre McCluskey, a good friend of Arjo and a good friend of mine, would say the great enrichment. So, and having something like a debt jubilee, or having something like a release, is something which works against, perhaps in a way, about the way a market economy is working. And the other point is, I'm not quite sure. So even at least from a German context, how important this issue is really. So of course we have problems in countries with debt. We have personal, individually problems with debt. But if you look, for example, in Germany, the rate of private bankruptcies is declining. So we had in the years about 2006 to 2012 about 100 private bankruptcies, and in the last years it was per year something about 60,000. And if you look on the numbers, you see 60% on these. If you look on numbers about consumer debt, it's 60%. It's not more than 500 euros. So it's not really a huge amount individually. So there are individual problems, of course, but the numbers are not that high in a way. And the other point, and I'm really eager to hear the opinions of from the others about these things, is yes, of course, having a debt is can be a personal tragedy. but the problem might be a little bit the other way around as well. So mainly people with personal problems are in debt. So the unemployed, for example, especially the long-term unemployed, the single parents, people with disease or something else. So they are debt, and I think we can't help them with a debt relief, but by helping them to come back to a better life.
Okay, thank you very much. Also, thank you for bringing the bankruptcy numbers, although I do think our report is very much about a public debt and about individual debt and not so much about corporate debt. And it's also, bankruptcy in general is also a very interesting issue, because in Holland, and I believe also in Germany, as a private person, you cannot really declare yourself bankrupt. Whereas in the United States, this has a very much different approach. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that in the Netherlands it is very hard to go bankrupt. You carry your debts with you, and as I said, you get a lifelong sentence basically, because you're also registered as someone who failed on his or her debts. Whereas in the United States, it is possible to go bankrupt. In some states, as we figured out, as we probably know, it's possible to, when you have, you are sort of, your mortgage is underwater, that your the value of your house is less than your debt, then in some states you can just hand over the key to the bank, and it is the bank's responsibility. So you're relieved from that debt. And it's also easier to go bankrupt in the United States than it is in the Netherlands. But I think that in response to Niels, I mean, I think your question is of course is that, sure, there's no issue that there is a market economy, that people go into debt to start enterprises, to undertake real economic activities, and that's not what we're addressing. What we're addressing more, and I'm curious also whether Eugenie is agreeing with that we have, and that actually also puts into your contextual matter, that we live in a culture that heavily favors debt. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, I was told not to spend money that you don't have, right? So taking on debt was seen as a negative thing. Be careful. Nowadays, you're crazy if you don't take on debt. If you don't finance your study by going into debt, while you don't finance your couch going in debt, or your television to go if you don't have the money, just take out the debt. So we feed and we nurture a debt culture. And I'm not so much sort of saying, well, about the numbers. Even if there are only a few people who are getting into trouble of that, then I think that in a civilized society we deal with that. And that's where this power relationship that Luigino was talking about comes into play. Because I think that in a civilized society, we don't allow it that people are humiliated, are condemned to living horrible lives, depressed, anxious, also shunned by others just for being in debt. I just appeal to you, Niels, but that's not what we want, do we? And don't we then want a sort of a way of addressing this, and in some way, in a civilized way, having the possibility of a jubilee, like a good practice preached in the Bible, that there is a moment of forgiving, that people should be able to start anew, and not being haunted by maybe mistakes or bad fortune, because often it is bad fortune, is my experience. And shouldn't we then look for a way to deal with this? And that is not to replace the market economy, but leave the market economy, but also realize in a civilized society we need other institutions to deal, like we also have the welfare state, but we have now a particular institution that deals with the debt problem. Because that's what I found. And I don't know the German situation, but I see in the Netherlands, and I know the American situation. that is chaotic, badly organized, highly problematic, very costly, just making debt problems only worse. We are not able at this moment to deal with the debt problem in a humane way. And that's what we in this report trying to address and resolve.
Okay. Looking at the time, we have to move on to the last part. But I want to give Professor Goldsmith an opportunity to react to this. So, do we have this responsibility, Professor Goldsmith?
Very short. So first of all, so the numbers I said are really consumer bankruptcies. So it's private bankruptcies where we have the decline. And yeah, it was about that. And in Germany, we have the possibility for private bankruptcies that is limited to 7 years. After that, everything is forgotten in a way. I don't want to be misunderstood. I fully agree that it is an absolute important ethical issue to help people who are in trouble, who have a private debt, and getting not out of these problem. And I fully agree that we have to search for institutional arrangements that people can come out of these problems. So, and I think that's part of, and I fully agree with Ayo, that's part of our civilization. That is the idea of the social market economy. It's it's always about good life, and the economy is only a mean to the end for good life. But my point is only, and that I want to know more about that, if this idea of that always really fit in. Debt release fit in, or in which way it could fit in a functioning, efficient market economy. So I have no problem in any way with the ethical statement. And my point is only how could we bring together these ethical issues with a functioning market economy, with a functioning financial sector. So I think always you need both, and that is my vision of a contextual economics, that we always have to think from the society, from the individual and its good life, and using the efficiency of markets for the aim of a humane society.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Bruni, how do you look at this? Because you've studied economics and you're also very much looking at it from an ethical perspective. So.
Yes, a lot of very interesting and controversial issues. Yes, I think to what Ario said, I think that forgiveness must be considered as something relevant in economic affair. Because yes, I agree with Professor Goldsmith that we have to distinguish between ethical and technical or economic issues, but there will be a moment when the two sides of the coin will dialogue with one another. I think to consider forgiveness just as a private issue for private romantic or familiar or friendship relationships, I think is not enough today, because there are situations where it's possible to imagine also to give to forgiveness a public and an economic dignity. But this is a very huge issue to define. But second, I think the issue, the problem, I would say, of a possible jubilee, also in the Bible, because as you know, the 50 years great jubilee, so-called, probably never occurred in Israel. Probably once, the one referred to Isaiah. Why? Because if you know, from an economic logic, if you know when you are 47 years after the last jubilee, that in 2 years all debt will be cancelled, of course the incentive to lend money will be too high. No? And then the jubilee must be one shot, not announced before, for not inducing moral hazards, not economic efficient operations. Then people against the idea of the limitation of debt, to say, but there are two debts in our economy, say, okay, but this is a sort of paternalism to define which kind of debt is good, which kind of debt is not good. People with disease, people with fragilities, they cannot, because people will say, okay, if you give some some collaterals. Okay, you are adult. There is no reason for defining, I don't know, as a state or as a church, if you are not allowed to borrow money. Then there is the issue of paternalism in a modern civil society. Then, just to conclude, historically, we have important experiences where debt was a very important civilizing tool. For instance, the microcredit of Yunus, not just Yunus. Then, when debt was more effective than gift as a mean of liberation of poor people. Second, also historically, when Franciscans was the first in the Middle Age to allow interest rate, to allow legal debt, why? They said, okay, it's possible to lend money, also with some interest, but this sort of interest rate is a participation to future profit. It's not a rent seeking, but is a sort of risk sharing. Because if the entrepreneur lends money and then makes some profits, the people lending money can participate to a share of the profit. And I think it's the same logic of Islamic finance today. Then I think we can discuss more which kind of debt is civilizing, is good, which kind of just rent-seeking, just a power relationship. But I think it is impossible to imagine a market society without some degree of financial debt, credit, and so on. I think we agree on that.
Yes, of course. So this Jubilee, I think we can agree, it involves all kind of problems and all kind of wrong incentive problems. But the relational finance perspective, as you, Professor Goldsmith, also brought up, how do we put this into a free market economy? This is something that the Volksbank does every day. So how do we do that, actually?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think under the current system, rules and regulations, including supervision, institutionalize distrust. That's a very uncomfortable system to work in. However, the solution to institutionalize trust, I think, runs a risk in itself as well. Not only talking about moral hazard, but it's also about where can you distinct the willingness to pay versus the unwillingness to pay. And that's where I think a mission of what we call banking with the human touch comes into place. We accept the economic relationship, which, according to our view, should be based on trust, satisfaction, and we dare even to say the word love. But in order to build that relationship, you have to know each other. So if our clients get into financial problems, we don't hand over the file to debt collectors, because that will absolutely lead to the economy that Ayo was referring to, which is detrimental to not only the personal interest of the individual, but also the relationship. So that's not the way we solve it. So we try to get into that relationship at full by knowing each other and accepting the mutual responsibility for the problem. And then turn it into technical terms. That means that you have to pay for the cure at the start of the problem. In model terms, that leads to a higher loss given cure. If you do that, you end up with lower probability of default and lower loss given default. And these concepts fit very well within the efficiency of a market. So by accepting the shared responsibility and the knowing each other element, including love of the relationship, you can then subsequently move to a model approach where you can show that at the end there's a lower probability of default and a lower loss given default. So it works very well within that market concept.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is great that how the Volksbank tries to integrate this relational finance perspective into their banking model. And that is also the point where I want to move on to the last part. So it is great, of course, that the Volksbank has this perspective, but how can we get all these other creditors to do the same and to look at this? What is the solution to this problem? Arjo, maybe you can give a
Yeah.
brief explanation on that. Yeah.
Yeah, we cite what the Volksbond does as one of the good measures. And actually, there are quite a few good measures on the table and also some executed. We talked with the organization of Amargis from Peter Hilhorst, who does a lot about debt prevention, has a sort of buddy coach and digital instrument to help people who have hard time managing their budgets. We refer to a report of the Amsterdam Mayor Halsema, social impact of the corona crisis, which suggests to take over debts of young people. And recently also Gerrit Salm, our former Minister of Finance, heading the Schuldenlab, the debt lab, proposed to reduce the debt relief program from 3 to 1 year, and also to found a sort of national fund to take over problematic debts. What we do in our report, try to go one step further. And our proposal is the following. It's not to displace the market, but to have an institution especially addressed to problematic debts. And our proposal is to found or reorganize existing credit banks regionally, who are specialized in dealing with the relationships with people who are in trouble with their debt. So as soon as people are incurring problematic debts with their insurance company, with the collecting agency of the government, with the building cooperation, they can go to the regional bank. It's actually agreed upon in our proposal already in their loan agreement that the debts are transferred to this bank. And the bank enters the relationship in a way, as Ossendorff described, the Volksbank is doing it. Enters a relationship with the debtor, the one who has the debt. And they together agree what the responsibilities are of both parties. Part of the debt, that's part of it, will be devalued as soon as it comes into the care of the credit bank. All debt collection agencies are of no need anymore. All other officials, professionals are of no need more, but the credit bank will work with all the volunteers now active coaching people in debt. So that will stay in order because the issue is problematic enough, but the credit bank will be specialized in that. And that's part of the deal. And that's very important to have the perspective that people who then are having their loans with the credit bank have the perspective that after, we suggest 7 years to respect the Sabbath, are acquitted from their debts, are forgiven. And that's what they have to work to. Of course, and I'm curious that Ossendorff will help with practical reasons to question whether that actually works in practice, and that we have to discuss then how that has a how practical we can make that. But that should be the principle, that people have the perspective that their debts will be forgiven in due time, and that they can start a full life. But the whole point of the credit bank is that they work towards just that. What Niels Goldman said, the good life should also be enabled for people like that. And so it is an additional institution to make our economy more civilized, also for people, for all kinds of reasons, good and bad, come in a position of having problematic debts. We also propose something similar for countries, but I prefer that we suggest that we stick now to the individual debts.
So yeah, Arjo also wanted to ask you.
Yes. Well, in itself, I can't be against the rationale and even the emotional favor behind the proposal because it's a good proposal. The worry I have is that at the point in time that the relationship is handed over to the regional bank with a different approach, it's a confirmation of the fact that the original bank did not have that relationship with the debtor. And my preference would be that that relationship is built initially already. Secondly, it would not distinct one bank from the other because banks will play the system. They will try to find the borders of how far they can go. And then in the end, there is always this way out of transferring at a price, undoubtedly. But they will try to find where the marginal income will be. 7 years on top of that, to institutionalize it as a generic approach, I see a risk, as I pointed out earlier on. In the case of the Volksbank, when people get into trouble, and we come to the joint conclusion that there is willingness to pay, but no capability to pay, we accept only for 3 years that people live at the minimum income level, because we believe that 3 years should be the sort of maximum. There should be an end at the light of the tunnel. So my point is, I would not institutionalize the solution, but I would enforce the system to incorporate it within their way of working. That I would prefer.
Okay, and how would you prefer that? How should the system incorporate this?
Well, I think it should be made much more clear to consumers, to clients, what the behavior of the individual bank is. Banks are now seen too generically as behaving all in the same way. I think they will gradually over time change. I think education is very important. I started by saying it's individual responsibility to take up a loan, but people should be much more aware of the risks when they endebt themselves. People don't have a lot of knowledge. They don't have a lot of financial resilience, and many of them are worried about the future. And that all three boils down to a lack of education. So I think it's very important to start at young age and to educate people in a much better way. So these are the differences I would like to make.
Okay. Thank you very much. Professor Arjo Klamer, not institutionalizing the problem. How do you think about that?
Now, I think it's great what the Volksbank was doing it, but that is not what the energy company is necessarily doing, because I have a debt with them too, or the insurance company, who is, and even worse, is the government. They are not willing to enter a relationship like the Volksbank does. So the envelopes still come on my doormat, driving me nuts, crazy. So even though I have a good relationship with the representative of Volksbank, I ignore, of course, the others, and gets me only a deeper problem. So our solution addresses that. There are no envelopes on the doormat anymore. There's one relationship that I have, one person who addresses me. And of course, the coaches and whatever other people are needed to get my life back in order, because there is a reason for me being in trouble. And it can be all kinds of things. I can be addicted. I have a problematic ex. I have taken education I shouldn't have. I mean, all kinds of things. But that is what enables me. I think that I am not a criminal. I shouldn't be treated like that. So I should take my responsibility if I am in that position. That I find very important, that I'm an adult who is responsible for his actions. But there should be a perspective that I will be forgiven of my debts, that I have a chance to go on with my life. Like your friend, the pilot. There is a moment that we say, now it's enough. We acquit you from that debt and you can go on with your life, find a girlfriend, find another career, whatever is in store of you. And that, to me, is in a civilized country, is so important to have that. And that's what we propose with our institution.
Yeah. So as a Volksbank, you might have a very good relationship with your debtor, and you might want to help this person. But what do you do with the rest of the creditors? Because you don't have one relationship, as in Arjo Klamer's proposal.
Yeah, Arjo is absolutely right that is a problem that we have to address. All the individual institutions he mentioned are working predominantly from their own perspective. Hence, we need to be able, privacy laws prevent us from that. We've started discussions with government to work on different ways of working together. We should be able to inform each other much earlier about the early signs of financial problems. Because it's clear from all studies, the longer you wait, the bigger the problem gets. And at the end, there's no way out. So I think sharing information, keeping in mind the privacy laws that we have to adhere to, is a crucial fact in order to make that work. And in the Netherlands, we're working on it, but already for quite a number of years. But that is, I think, one of the big changes that we need to make.
Okay. Yeah, I want to sort of work to a solution, because I feel like we all want the same, but what we need to educate people. But then what? Do we just need to sit and wait till the institutions start to find a solution, or yeah? Professor Goldsmith, go ahead.
So I once again want to emphasize what Maurice Ossendorff said. So I think economic education is really crucial. So I do have a chair for contextual economics and economic education, because if you have educated people, they have a different mindset. And Arjo already talked about that. So 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people have different thoughts about that and the relation between economics and society. And I think economic education, if you do not understand it only as a mere technical education, but as a societal sensitive education, would be a great asset for the people. And we do have the discussion in Germany about having a school subject economics, and I think that's necessary. We're living in a market economy, if we want it or if we don't want it, but we're living in a market economy, and we should educate our youth to understand how markets work and how is the relation between markets and society. I think that's really the crucial point to change the system, by changing the mindset, by having a better understanding. So if you look on surveys, I'm stopping here in a second. If you look in surveys and people are asked what want you to do with 1 hour more per day, the most are saying doing barbecue with friends. And the worst thing people want to do is to deal with financial issues.
Yeah. We wouldn't be economists if we wouldn't kind of propose our own economics discipline as the most important one in high school, of course. But yeah, I believe Professor Bruni wanted to say something as well.
Just 2 words. No, I like the rationale, the ratio, the inspiration of this new institution Arjo is claiming for. Just two notes, very short, very quickly. First, today actually there are in the market companies, institutions who buy wrong, almost totally wasted credits. Now there is a huge business on that. But as you know, the attitude of this kind of company buying the unsolvable credits, the attitude is very similar to the pitiless servant of the gospel. Then we need some institution, maybe non-profit institution or state institution, who deal with this kind of situation without the incentive of profit. Because if you put the incentive of profit in dealing, as today actually is, in dealing with a similar situation, of course, market doesn't work well for everything. I think for this kind of very particular situation of debt with people, with the innocent, honest people in trouble, because as the book of Job tells us in the Bible, not all people in troubles are guilty. It's possible to be just in trouble without any guilt. Then we have to look for this kind of people, but without the incentive of profit for the institution.
Thank you very much. Yeah. I believe we are almost at the end, but I almost forgot about the questions actually. So Rens, do we have any interesting questions?
Yes, thank you, Vera. We definitely do. Some comments, questions, and we do not have a lot of time to go into them. So I'll just give an overview. Maybe to start with Robert Visser, who is saying that living in the Netherlands, it's actually very hard not to get into debt. Just to get a roof above your head. House prices are very high, but you pay even more if you're paying a rent. So in that sense, getting into debt in the Netherlands, it's not even something that education can solve. But you simply need to go that way. And Jeroen Haans is also referring to the money creation by commercial banks, which sort of like stimulates that. So they say, instead of only looking at the solution for the current debt, maybe we should also talk about what we need to do in order to get, to prohibit debts from starting in the first place. And then Pauline Swiers, who is working a lot with people who are in debt, says she missed the behavioral perspective here. I think Arjo alluded to it also, but the fact that people who are in debt, that they have a lot of stress and for that reason cannot function anymore. And that also, by the way, is an economic problem in itself, and prohibits the market economy from working well. And then lastly, maybe Connie Berger, who made a few remarks, but I think one I want to refer to one. She said that we're talking a lot about religion here, but we don't actually need religion to get to the kind of like solutions that Arjo is proposing. Just think about the human rights, think about the sustainable development goals. If we keep on working with debts the way we do it now, they will be out of reach anyway. And we have agreed upon that as countries in the world, we want to be there in 2030. So it is time for more radical solutions.
It is indeed, yeah. So I'm sorry that we didn't have time to discuss all the questions that you posted. But I think it is clear that we need to become aware of this problem and that we need to find a solution globally and nationally to this problem, and also for creditors to build a relationship so that you can better see what the debtor needs and how he is suffering and how you can help him. But of course, in this 1 hour, we cannot solve all the problems in the world. But I hope that we've kind of given a new perspective on this. So I want to thank you very much for listening. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you also very much, Professor Goldsmith and Professor Bruni, and of course, Professor Klamer and Maurice Oostendorp and Rens van Tilburg, Director of the Sustainable Finance Lab.